Welcome back to another conversation. So glad that you're here. We are in week 7 of our God So What series, which really is just all about the attributes of God and who he is. And we're really taking a deep dive into some pretty incredible stuff. And this week's topic is one that I think we can all relate to, and that's about trust. And really the question, can we trust God? Yeah.
That's a big question, man.
Yeah.
I think that's a key to really defining if I want to have a relationship with God or not, is because if you can't trust God, then you're not going to define a relationship with him. And my thought was you can only trust somebody as much as you know somebody. So that's sort of how it started out, the message.
Yeah. You know, in a world, I think that quickly wants to gain our trust, but doesn't work hard to keep trust.
Yes.
God being trustworthy, I think is really, really important when we think about that. And you shared a couple things I thought were really good. You said in order for someone to trust someone else, there's kind of 3 things that they need to have. Number 1, the person you're going to trust needs to tell the truth.
Yeah. Yeah. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
I think, I've got 5 kids. I think the thing that probably messes with me more about the kids than anything is when they don't tell me the truth.
Yeah.
Because when you don't tell the truth and they're not telling the truth, that's not going to end well. But the neat thing about God is he does always tell the truth.
Yeah. Another aspect you said should be that person should be fair, do what's right, there's a justness there.
Yes.
Which I think we see, obviously, with God, for sure. He's the ultimate justice.
He is.
Correctness. He's right in his ways.
Yes.
That's a struggle, too, right? To be fair and to consider those things. It's hard sometimes.
It is hard sometimes. It's definitely hard for us.
Yeah.
So that's the reason I think we need to depend on him, because he is fair.
Right.
Tells the truth. He's just.
And then number 3, you said that person should be reliable, dependable, if you could develop a relationship. I think that's, trust is dependability over time. As you continue to depend on someone, you can find that they're trustworthy. That doesn't happen in one sitting.
Yeah, the reason I sort of put that in there is because on the Enneagram, I'm a 2, for those of you who sort of know anything about that, which is a helper. So my tendency is it's really hard for me to say no, because I want to help people, and I do think it's a great quality if you're going to be in ministry to desire to help people. But at the downside of that is you can help so much that it ends up hurting, or you promise things you can't fulfill. And in my friendship relationships, the things I think I've struggled with most are people who overpromise and underdeliver. I do that in church world too, or even in business, if you make a promise and then you don't fulfill that promise, that's tough. So the neat thing about God is he never overpromises and underdelivers. If anything, he underpromises and overdelivers, so it's pretty cool.
Sure, time and time again, he's so good to us. You say that, and it sounds very like churchy, like, oh, God's so good. And it's like, but he is good to us. Yeah. We don't deserve his love, but he gives it freely. We don't earn his grace and favor, but he gives that to us. The Bible says that he lavishes that on us. Yes. And that's kind of a wild picture for us, because I do think that we're good at holding grudges, right? We're good at saying, I can't trust you, for various reasons. But then you mentioned some things. I think this is good, was some things that God can't do.
Yeah.
So we're talking about in this series all these things that God can do and who he is. But then you mentioned 3 things that he can't do. Number 1, you said God cannot do any wrong.
Yeah, he's perfect. We learned that. So the deal is, we learned that last week. There's sort of an order in my mind on these characteristics of God as we get to know him better. So last week we learned that, he is in control. He's a sovereign God. And God cannot do wrong. It's impossible for him to do wrong. That's just a concept that's so hard for us, because we can do wrong at the drop of a hat, Yeah,
it's incredibly easy how quick we can do wrong.
It is.
Yeah, but he can't do any wrong. Number 2, he can't lie.
Can't lie. Yeah. That's another reason why we can trust him so well.
We're talking about the Enneagram. Like, I'm a 3 on the Enneagram, and I'm really good at performing, and I want to achieve things, and I want to put my best self forward and man, I can dream big, even, and then in the back of my head, it's like, that's not going to happen, right? I don't think I could do this, and I remember one time I was on a trip in Portugal, and they needed someone that could drive a van for the ministry teams, and I was like, who can drive a stick shift? And I was like, I can drive a stick shift. And I had driven one in the past, but like not regularly. I learned how to drive a stick shift on a 1972 Volkswagen Bug or Beetle, and this was a 5-speed Mercedes turbo diesel van.
Ooh, big time, James.
Yeah. And it was a diesel, which I did not drive. And so they dropped me off. I'm in Portugal. They dropped me off and they're like, see you back at the hotel. And I'm like, cool. And then I was sitting in that car and I'm like, what have I done? I don't know that I'm could I drive a stick? Yes. Did I lie about my, proficiency?
Abilities?
Yeah. I think I overshot that. And it was okay. I figured it out. But I stalled that thing so many times. And, I'd never driven a diesel, but I knew that it had plugs that had to warm up. But I was like, it was a first for everything. And that was dumb. But I'm glad that God doesn't overpromise, right? He's like, oh, I probably love you so much, I will probably give my son. He's like, no, he is going to do that.
He does.
Which I'm thankful for. And then number 3, this is great too. God cannot break his promise.
Yeah, my thought was I was trying to sort of build a bridge into what I wanted to talk about in this idea of trusting God. So, think about this. God cannot break a promise. He never breaks a promise. And the nice thing about his word is it's filled with promises. So if I can learn the promises of God, then my life can be so much more fruitful and faithful.
Yeah.
And because he's not going to break those promises. In my own life, I think the times I've hurt my kids most is when I have broken promises to them. That really does affect trust. So I'm cautious now to not promise a lot to the kids because I know how easy it is for me to break a promise. And I've tried to think, I'm not going to be a perfect parent by any means. Yeah. But I do want, if I promise, I want to fulfill that. Because that really really erodes our relationships for sure. Yeah,
when you think about that, I've had to do that too, where I've had to come to my kids and apologize. We talked about that in the past about, attitude and anger and all these kind of things. But really, God never has to apologize to us. Isn't that crazy? He never has to say, I'm sorry, I didn't come through. And really, I hope that in this series, you're seeing this movement of, here's some things that God can only do, right? He's omniscient, he's all-knowing, he's omnipresent, he's immutable. And here are some attributes of God that he is fully, and we can emulate in a way, right? God is gracious toward us. Well, we can't be that gracious to people, but we can offer grace as we've been, and this week, can we trust God? Yeah, he's trustworthy. So we can strive to be trustworthy, but also knowing we're not always going to be perfect. Yeah. And I do think that there is this propensity in the world that we live in that is so image driven to be right and perfect all the time and almost to fight people when you're not. I'm guilty of that, right? It's I know what I'm talking about. It's you do not know, right? It's okay, fine, I don't. We have a hard time even just admitting I don't know, right? We have to make up excuses and things.
Yeah, one of the things, on that truth about that sort of resonated with me, and I shared this a little bit in the message, but I had always had on my bucket list to go to Israel, and just the expense of it and all, just never really was able to make that happen. And then through a God story, we were able to go take a few of our pastors here at Highlands. And for me, just to walk the hills where Jesus walked and go to the places that I've taught on for 33 years in the Bible, this life of Jesus, and then all these Old Testament prophecies, we were at Jericho. We walked around. We saw the walls on how they fell. It was crazy, And I just thought throughout that whole trip of all these promises that God made to Israel and how the world has tried to eliminate Israel over and over and over and over. Yeah. And although we don't have any of the other ites, the Jebusites and the
parasites.
Yeah, the parasites and the
Hittites.
termites and all those people. But we still have the Israelites,
Yeah.
And man, it's interesting in prophecy, God says he's going to draw his people back to Israel. And now Jewish people from all over the world are coming home. It's just an amazing thing about how God fulfills his promise. And that helped me to understand how faithful he is to his promises to his people.
Yeah. I want to hit on, you shared 5 or 6 different areas on how we can depend on God.
Yeah.
And so if you missed those, go back and check those out. We don't have time to rock through all those, and you can watch the message, which was great. But I want to hit on one that I think was the most interesting to me as you said it, which is I can depend on God to settle the score.
Okay.
Which, I liked how you framed that, because it's like, what? He's gonna do what? But share a little bit about, where you were thinking in that. And
Yeah, I think so many people in life think that when I become a Christian, then life is going to be fair. And we see things all the time, and this can even happen to ourselves, where scandals happen and people get off scot-free and they seem to, escape to some chartered island with millions of dollars, and we think, man, life is not fair, and it's not. Life is not fair. We're working every day. We're barely getting by. It's like, come on, God, what's the deal? And then I think sometimes people intentionally hurt us. I had to learn, if I'm going to be a leader, especially at a church like Highlands, I can't please everybody. And some of the things that have been said have really, in the beginning days, it was like, oh my gosh, it was so hurtful, and I was just thinking, daggone it, I'm mad about it. And I'm going to get even with these people. That's not even true. And, when it's true, that's one thing. It can hurt, but if it's true, but when it's just so far removed from truth and somebody just spews something out, and the way it is with social media today is just crazy. So I think we all have to decide, who are we going to allow to defend us? And God says, I will defend you if you're my child, or you can defend yourself. I'm going to give you that choice. You can trust me to defend you, or you can defend yourself. And it's interesting, James, to me, when I study in Scripture, when people tried to defend themselves, often God just sort of stepped back and said, all right, go after it. And a lot of times it was complete annihilation. They
did not end well mostly.
Yeah. But when people said, I'm going to let God defend me, again, the story of marching around the wall 7 times, and is that not the stupidest story?
Yeah.
It's just crazy.
It doesn't make any sense.
And yet God completely takes over and wins the battle. So I feel like so many people are caught up in this idea of revenge. I've got to get even. Life's not fair. And if you can ever come to the point in your life where you just say, God, I'm trying to do the best I can here. I know I'm fallible. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm just going to trust you to fight my battle for me and to avenge. And, one day God says, I'll settle the score. I'll notice what's happening. You be faithful. I'll settle the score.
It goes back to, we talked about the kind of God's timeline versus our timeline, and that he sees so much more. So in that moment, we're like, well, I'm going to respond, right? You kind of get this kind of seething anger that on the back of your tongue, and you're like, I'm going to get on my keyboard and I'm just going to, and it's like, whoo, and I think about times that I've done that before, like responded to someone in an honest way of hurt or just like frustration, right? It's like, that's not true. You don't know what you're talking about. And it never goes well. It never ends well, But and you shared a verse from 1 Peter, which I thought was really good, and it's talking about when Jesus is insulted and when people are saying things about him. He says, when Jesus, he never answered back to them when he was insulted. When he suffered, he didn't threaten to get even. He left his case in the hands of God. And it's like, if Jesus can do that, right? Who has all right to look at someone and be like, you are wrong, right? To just like destroy them, right? He could do like the ultimate Twitter takedown, and he doesn't do anything, right? And then it's like, so what right do I have to do that? in my sort of feeble self. But that's, and it never ages well. If we're going to be honest, and even outside of just like a spiritual standpoint of like, oh, just take the high road. Like that sounds so easy. When I look back on times that I've engaged in something, I don't ever think that I thought, I'm really glad I did that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't think I changed anybody's mind, and I think I just made myself more stressed.
Yeah, and I completely agree, James. However, I don't want to make light of when people have been hurt and you have this, there's a lot of things with all the abuse we see taking place, all these kind of things. Man, I'm not trying to make light. I'm not trying to give some kind of pat spiritual answer. But I would say when you find yourself getting bitter and resentful, get help. Get help. Go get some help, because that's a dead-end street that will not allow any hope for you. And I think it's the devil's idea of trying to lead us straight down a path of utter desolation and depression. So, and it's easy to get there. It's easy to get there with all the crazy things that can happen in our world. I think there's so much of this polarity in our culture today, and we can get vengeful about certain things. And I just have to stop, put it on pause, and say, what is the purpose that God has for my life? Because there's 1,000 different ways to divert where God wants us to be and go. Sure.
It's easy. It's easy to get distracted, right?
It is.
And really, I hope that through this series, there is some clarity on the goodness of God, the sureness of Him. I know for me, it's been encouraging just to be reminded that God He's like able to sustain, like He's powerful and He's strong. And it's easy to say that in a real like churchy, Sunday school answer, like, oh, God, He creates the world, and He's really. It's like, yeah, but like, what does that mean? Well, it means that I can trust Him. When He is, immutable, and He is all these things, and He is ultimately one who's trustworthy. Well, that means that I can depend on Him, and that's a truth that I can keep when I'm in that dark place, right? When I am hurting. If I know that I can trust God, that actually means something to me. It's not just a platitude. And I hope that you guys have experienced that through this series and through digging in deeper. Like we said last week, if you have any questions, we'd love to answer those. Maybe we'll do like a Q&A type thing after the series is over from some stuff, because we've gotten tons of questions from people from various things about this series. So we've got one more week next week. Man, week 8. And
So I've been at Highlands now, going on my 9th year, I believe, and this is the first 8-week series that I have stayed excited about for all weeks. I remember we did 40 Days in the Word. It was this great series. We had hundreds and hundreds of people in circles, and it was crazy, how much God was doing. But I felt like I was 40 years in the Word, by the end of that series, and I found myself almost moving on to something foreign. It's just my personality. But I will honestly say this series, and for some reason, every week that I get to teach about another characteristic of God, I'm excited. I can't wait to get here. I can't wait to share the message. And, I can't wait to hear some of your feedback. Obviously, we got some people who don't always like it, and I get that. Yeah. But, man, so many of you have shared about how that particular characteristic or attribute of God is exactly what you needed for this time in your life. And that just helps me to believe that we're joining God in exactly where He wants us to be. We're trying to learn all about God. And I think as we know Him more, we'll trust Him more.
That's good. That's great. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Don't miss next week. And if you missed any of these messages, again, you can always find them on our website. You can go to our podcast. Just search for Highlands Fellowship. We're easy to find. Find all of our videos on YouTube. It's accessible, right?
It is.
It's out there for you. And we'll see you next week for week 8 of this series.